young people today, if you again, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. Young people today really look at the United States and Western society. They look at it as this total evil because it engaged in slavery, right? And it might be. And part of me thinks that it's just like I'm mad at dad, but yeah, like the idea that Western society is unique, and this time of peace that we're living in is anomalous.
It is, yeah.
And I think that it would do well to teach kids how reality is.
Well,
and reality is brutal, and life is full of pain. It's short. Death is imminent for everybody. And the fact that you have any peace at all in your entire life is actually the rare, wonderful, fortunate thing that Western society in particular has provided for the world.
Well, if you go back to the ancient world, just look at how they treated children. I mean, infanticide was rampant. There's like a letter from one Egyptian husband to his wife said, by the way, if it's a girl, just kill it. Because that was normal in the ancient world to just commit infanticide through exposure, especially deformed infants or weak children, like Seneca talks about that. And so, we can look back at surveys of ancient families, and only a 6 out of 600. Owen Bakke talks about this in his book, When Children Became People. Only 6 out of 600 had more than one girl in the family. Well, why? Well, because infanticide was rampant, and boys were more prized because they could take care of the family. They would be, they're first-class citizens, and girls were second-class citizens. And so they did that, and there they leave kids out on the countryside to have them exposed. Now, a lot of them survived, so they could be raised as slaves or in brothels. I mean, children to the ancient Greeks and Romans were used for sexual purposes. What happens? The Christians come on the scene, and John Martins talks about this in his chapter, Children in Late Ancient Christianity. Christians invented a whole new word to describe it because they refused to use the term child lover. They invented a new word called child corrupter as a rhetorical to say, you can't be doing this. And so they really pushed ethics forward. Children need to be protected. They invented.
When did that idea, what was the spawn of that idea? Because here again, we grew up steeped in Christianity, and to us, the idea of abusing a child like that, we think of it as abuse, it makes a gut reaction in most people, and the people that don't have that gut reaction, they are looked at and they are treated as some of the most horrible monsters that. You put a pedophile into prison, and word gets out, and they're going to end up dead. And that's in a prison with some of the worst, most violent people, our society, produces. So how did what was the genesis of that?
The Judeo-Christian tradition, especially Jesus saying, let the little ones come to me. Anyone who causes one of these little ones to sin, let a millstone be tied around their neck and cast into the sea. That kind of language. I mean, really, the Jews prior to the Christians were preaching to protect children. Then the Christians come on and they really expanded it, working on what Jesus and Paul taught. We know that the early Christians were including children, and they were baptizing them, including them in communion. They were full members of the community. The Romans and the Greek looked at them as becoming adults, like they weren't full adults yet, or they weren't full people yet. Aristotle talks about them being less rational, along with barbarians, women, and slaves. There was a hierarchy, and Christians come on the scene and they go, no, everyone here is the image of God, and they should have specific rights. That's something that also develops out of the Christian tradition. And they slowly start to change the culture. It took a while, for sure. I mean, you still had infanticide in the Middle Ages because even though the church was condemning it, it took a while to saturate the culture that Tom Holland talks about. But the reason why we think these kinds of things, that slavery is wrong, that human rights exist, that humanity has intrinsic value, and that children should be cared for, this comes out of the Christian tradition. In the ancient world, they were beat routinely. They were turned into sex slaves as children, boys and girls. It's, again, horrifying to read. And again, slavery was just the norm. No one ever questioned the idea that slavery should be abolished until the Christians came on the scene. The first one to say slavery should be abolished was Gregory of Nyssa, working on what he was learning in the scriptures and reading Paul and Genesis. And that slowly began to change.
When was that?
What was that?
When was that?
I believe it was in the 300s, as Gregory of Nyssa was around.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the wider culture did ignore him for a while, but you start to see throughout the Christian tradition them slowly moving to end slavery, that by the time you get to St. Anselm, it's sort of getting abolished from Europe in a lot of places. And so then the Europeans later on going, well, we're not allowed to enslave Christians. We know that's wrong. Let's go elsewhere to enslave people, and that's how you get the transatlantic
Sure, yeah.
slave trade. And then the funny thing is if you read about the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of the plantation owners were trying to keep their slaves away from missionaries, because if the missionaries come in, they're going to evangelize these slaves and turn them in to Christians, and then we'll have to free them.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.